right, here we are for week 2. We're with John. Hi, John.
Good morning.
All righty, and what we have here is the results of last week's meeting. And what I thought I would do is have John explain briefly what we did last week, and then what we're trying to accomplish this week. Go ahead, John.
Today we're going to be doing a test socket fitting. Some people around the country call it a check socket. The primary purpose of this is to be sure that our fit is optimal before we fabricate the definitive socket. We want to achieve total contact. We want to see that the socket fits evenly top to bottom, that there's no sense of looseness in some areas or excessive tightness in other areas. And once that is evaluated and properly assessed, we'll move into a static alignment so that we can move from this test socket into the definitive socket fabrication. We'll have a good idea how this should stand over the knee when we fabricate the new socket.
Good. Okay, something I notice here, and I've noticed this in the past, is this thing is completely clear. It looks like a glass jar. Why do we do that?
It just helps to be able to see gaps. In the past, without liners, you could actually see the skin blanch, but in this phase, it just allows us to see gaps.
Cool. And then I notice in the bottom of that, it looks like there's putty or something. What's that all about?
We use putty to get an accurate representation of the distal end of the bottom end of the patient's stump.
Okay.
That putty will move and shift and shape to the bottom of the residual limb.
All right, so what are some of the things that we commonly find in this phase 2? What are some of the things we know we want to fit snug and all? Does it always work that way, or?
Not always. If we had our tensions wrong from the mold to the test socket phase, we may find that we need to tighten some things. We may find we need to loosen some things.
Okay.
If there are bony prominences that need our attention, we'll address that, mark it, and relieve it.
All right. Now, in my case, we're doing two things. We're getting a socket so that I can walk better, but we're also got a secret project that we're doing that involves cycling. We're not going to talk about that right now, but is the process the same for someone who's going to be active versus someone who's not, or is it?
It is essentially the same.
Okay.
A more active person, we might look for a socket to be slightly more snug in some areas for control factor, but then again, if it's too snug, you've got pressure, you've got abrasion, you have similar complications whether they're highly active or not so active.
Okay, and then right before we're done here, I notice, I'm going to grab this, that this, if you'll hold that up there, this is basically a main difference other than circumferentially we're a little bit tighter, is that this is going straight up, whereas before my socket was out, and that's due to the weight loss that I've had.
Right.
So can you give an example now of this socket? We couldn't see it well last time, but now this is clear.
Well,
the liner, I mean.
The old socket had a much greater taper. It was much more conical rather than cylindrical.
Okay.
But the cylindrical socket here is going to give Bryant a much tighter fit at the top.
Okay.
But this liner will slide right down in the socket, and these rings, with Bryant's limb in them, these rings will seal against the wall of the socket and not allow air to return to the inside of the socket. It's okay if air is expressed out, but we don't want air getting back in.
And that's what essentially holds this puppy tight to the body.
Correct.
All right. Do you ever smile, or are you always so serious?
I'm always serious.
Okay, that's what I like, a serious process. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
All right, we have Bryant's test socket on, and what we're looking at here, you can see some of these areas are compressed, but a lot of the other areas, there's not much compression of those rings. On the back side, there's a much greater amount of compression of the lower ring and the next one from the very bottom, but there's not much compression of these upper rings. That tells me that we don't have enough tension in this area to create a solid seal. Now, Bryant can't lift out of this socket because there is an adequate seal, but if we want to gain as much from this liner and this socket as we can, we're going to learn from this and go ahead and tighten the socket a little bit in this lower area before we make the definitive socket. Okay, what we've done is we've indicated an area of pressure that Bryant has noticed, and as you can see, the ring is pretty well compressed, almost all the way around 2/3 of the socket, I would say. But above that lower ring, there's still some gapping. If we even out the tensions above the lower ring, I believe the pressure he is sensing over this area will be reduced because we will even out the weight and pressures throughout the upper levels of this socket. So we'll make that adjustment and move on to the next phase.
All right, we got him smiling now, so that's good. All right, so this thing's looking different. You were just gone here for a few minutes, and you've come back, and now what's going on here? What are we doing now?
Well, for those of you who are old school, you'll understand what I mean by this, but I had to roll a coat inside the socket. I rolled a coat of resin in the area around the seals so that the only area of the socket that was tightened was the area around the seals. Because we are relying on those seals for suspension,
Yep.
if I just put pads in here to tighten it up, that's
Yep.
going to let air in, it's
Okay.
going to distort the mold.
Okay, so basically what we did is we just filled it in as opposed to heating it to shrink or anything. We filled it in, and then we're going to try it in, and we're going to compare it with the other socket, and all sorts of crazy magic is going on right now, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
it's all magic.
It's all about magic.
It's all
Poof.
magic.